So when we were looking at the modular synthesis that both Benji and Suzanne Chani were doing, even though she said in the last bit that there was a digital component in the first two that were done on the Moog modular system, that was all done with what's called control voltage, so that the amount of current or electricity changes the parameter. It changes the pitch, it drives the sequencer, and as such, voltage is an analog component, which means that it has a smooth shape to it. Once you start getting into computers and digital things, those are all kind of like stepped. What do I mean by that? Well, the computer language is all based on ones and zeros. It's binary. So that means that something is either on or it's off. And we're going to explore this in terms of audio later in the semester. But what I want to say is that when you're playing back something that you've played into the sequencer, it is picking a spot on the timeline to play back that roughly corresponds to what you played. When you record audio, in the old days, you recorded onto analog tape, which was magnetic, and it just captured stuff in time and used, magnetism and these transducers to change that magnetism into electrical energy that became audio. And that's what all the sequencers did as well. But when you're dealing with a sequencer like any kind of digital sequencer, even if it's a little hardware unit, like if you've got a keyboard and it's got like a sequencer on it, if it's a digital keyboard, it follows these principles. That Moog I showed you last week is virtually all analog. So I believe that those things are all done with voltage as well, the sequences and the arpeggiators that are on that. But on a sequencer, if you go from beat 1 to beat 2, there are steps between that beat, each beat. It's not a continuous flowing shape. There are steps, and that those steps are called, that's the resolution. And what I like to do is, if you think about a painting, right? The painter goes there with a brush and he or she does a stroke on the canvas, and it's a continual line. Now, in that line, there may be different shapes depending upon how the size of the brush, how much of the brush head they actually get onto the canvas, how thick the oil paint or whatever medium they're working with is. But it's a contiguous line that's all shaped, and there's no stepping in that. When you take a digital photograph, right, when you look at a photograph, everything looks like it's a real image, but it's a series of dots, right? And that is analogous to the resolution or the space between a beat. And so in a photograph, you hear things like, if you buy a printer, what's the how many dots per inch, DPI, right? So if you get a printer that has 72 DPI, the image that it prints will not look as good as if it has something that's 300 DPI, because you've got more dots into the space, and so therefore the space looks more filled in. So let me go to the TV screen here and we will take a look at that. So for example, right, if we look at this, these are 3 resolutions of an image. This is what you would see at 10 dots per inch, square inch. This is what you would see at 72 dots per inch. And this is what you'd see at 300 dots per inch. Now, if I were to zoom in on 10 dots per inch, you could see that the edges are square, little squares, right? If I go here to the 72 dots per inch, right, you could see that there's still like little teeth over here and at the edge of these letters, right? But when you zoom out, and especially if I make it smaller, that looks like a perfect circle now, right? Because we've zoomed away. Now, if we zoom back in and we go over to 300 DPI, right, you could see that there's still these steps on the border, but you see the difference in size, right? You could see these are still little squares, as are these, but there's so many of them that they make it look at a normal distance. This looks perfectly round, and this looks a little stepped on the edges, and this looks like squares, right? So let's take a look at an image and do the same thing. So this image here has been printed at 72 dots, or rendered at 72 dots per inch, and you could see that it looks very fuzzy. The same image rendered at 300 dots per inch, much sharper. I use this very unit, Yamaha QX21, not this model, and I purchased this in the summer of 1985. And you notice that it's got a little screen here it was called hexadecimal, and there were 2 digits here, and that's how you found everything out. It was a 2-track sequencer, and each track could have 16 channels. So you could, if you were clever, make 32-track recordings, but then you'd have to have 32 tracks of synthesizers, 32 synthesizers, to play it back. Right, because it didn't record audio. It just recorded MIDI information, and then it would spit that MIDI information out. So at that time, I think I had 4 synthesizers and a drum machine. So I could get like five tracks going on at once. And the resolution, so this has like a lower resolution. So the space between each quarter note has a term called PPQ, and that stands for pulse per quarter note. And those pulses have a name called ticks, Ticks, like the little bug that gives you Lyme's disease, right? But it's the same word, but it has a different meaning here. So on this particular unit here, between every quarter note, it had 24 pulses per quarter note, or 24 ticks. That meant that if you played an eighth note, the first eighth note would be on the first tick, or the first pulse, and the second eighth note would be on the 12th or the 13th pulse. So if you start at 0, first eighth note of a beat is on 0, and the second eighth note of a beat is on 12. So, and then 16th notes were on 0, 6, 12, and 18. And you see where I'm going here. What if you're playing in real time and you didn't want it to be perfectly metronomic, and you played something that was between the 11th and the 12th pulse? The sequencer would make the choice and put it on one of those pulses for you. So it was not playing back 100% accurate what you played. And this is one reason why when you listen to music from the 1980s, it sounds very mechanical, a lot of it, because they were using these hardware sequencers back then that had very rigid and very low resolution. So there was very, very difficult to get a good human feel out of them. But it was a great tool, and I did do a lot of work with it. So then the next sequencer I bought was a QX5 by Yamaha, and that was great. It had eight tracks on it, and each track could have 16 sequences, and I had a few more synthesizers by then. So that one had 96 was the resolution. So it was 4 times more accurate than this. Then, and notice how 24, 96, they're even numbers. They're even numbers because we typically divide music up into even divisions, typically, right? These were made for pop music. So eighth notes divide into 24, 12 times 2 is 24. 16th notes, 4 times 6 is 24. Eighth note triplets, 8 times 3 is 24. 16th note triplets, right? So that's 8. So it'd be 8. 3 times 8 would be 24, right? So all those things divided into that 24 evenly. And then 4 times the resolution is 96. And so then now you could start getting a little bit more accurate, and it sounded much better, right? And then the next hardware sequencer I got was one by Roland called the MC50 Mark II. Let me see if I can get one of those up. What was great about this was that this had a floppy disk over here. So I could store my sequences onto a floppy disk. And it had a bigger screen, and it had a lot more buttons and a dial. I did a lot of work with this. And so before this, if I wanted to save something, I had a cheap mono cassette that I bought from Radio Shack. And the older sequencers made this really harsh tone that sounded almost like a dial-up internet sound, right? And you would record that onto a cassette, and then to get your work back in, you'd have to do the opposite, play it back and have this recorded. That was hit or miss. I could hardly ever get that to work. But once I started getting into these things with floppy disks, it was great. I could store 100 songs on one floppy disk because the sequences themselves didn't take up a lot of data. So it was great. So then the resolution of this was 192. So it was twice as great as the last one I had and 8 times as good as the original one. And so the very first computer sequencer I used was something called Vision, which became Studio Vision Pro by this company Opcode, right? So that's what my screen looked like. I loved working in this sequencer. I loved working this sequencer much better than Pro Tools. And there were things that they did with this sequencer that even the most sophisticated sequencers now never really picked up. But many of us, I have a lot of friends that use this, that I'm friends with on social media. And, there were things that came with this that were really amazing. Like this right here. You see these boxes here? These are called subsequences, right? And then what you could do is you could just move things around by moving these boxes around. And there might be 20 tracks inside of this box. So you could have this box playing in 4/4, and then you could have another series of subsequences playing in 7/8. You could have another series of subsequences playing in 5/8, all at the same time, and it was just amazing to do. And there were just a lot, it was just really great. But this had a resolution of 192 also. So Pro Tools and all the modern sequencers have 960 pulses per quarter note, space between each quarter note, or 960 ticks. With other sequencers like Cubase, Logic, and Performer, you can make that even more of a resolution. You could have, 1,920, right? You could have 3,840, right? You could have such incredible resolution. I find that that's a bit overkill. The 960 feels really good to me. I don't really feel any weirdness about the playing, and it doesn't use up as much processing power as having something with more resolution. And if I wanted something with more resolution, I'd play something. I'd set the tempo at twice the speed and play it at, like, instead of the metronome being an eighth note, a quarter note, it would be an eighth note. And then I'd play it back if I needed something with more resolution. But those are little tricks. So let's take another look at this. So on the top here, I've just wrote out on graph paper a quarter note, 4 quarter notes. This is 1 bar of music, right? And when you look at Pro Tools, you'll see these numbers here for each bar in a measure of 4/4. You'll see bar 1, beat 1, and 3 zeros. Those are the ticks, right? Those are the pulses per quarter note. On beat 2, you'll see bar 1, beat 2, and again, 3 zeros. So this repeats every beat. Beat 3 for the quarter note, 1, beat 3, measure bar 1, beat 3, and this is 3 zeros, and the same with beat 4. And then the whole pattern repeats, except you're starting with bar 2. And I'm going to show you this in Pro Tools, but this is a good way to look at this. Now, eighth notes, right? So I've got eighth notes here. So there are 2 eighth notes for every quarter note. So the first eighth note starts on the same spot as the first quarter note, so it has the same notation here. The second eighth note is, in time-wise, halfway between the first quarter note and the second quarter note. So I said this had a resolution of 960, so half of that is 480. So on the second one, you'd get bar 1, beat 1, and 480. The counter would say that, and that lets you know that you're on the second eighth note. And that pattern repeats for all 4 beats. And then if you look here, we've got 16th notes. So there are 4 16th notes, as you know, for every quarter note, and there are 2 16th notes for every eighth note. So if we look here, we're dividing the 960 into 4 equal parts, which is 240 ticks. So again, the first 16th note starts in the same place as the first quarter note and the first eighth note. The second 16th note is between the 2 eighth notes, and it's 1/4 of the way between the first 2 beats. So 1/4 of 960, sorry for the plane, we've got bar 1, beat 1, and 240. That's the second 16th note. So the first 16th note starts on 3 zeros. The second 16th note starts on 240. The third 16th note is in the same spot as the second eighth note, so it's 480. And you see that I've got them lined up here. And then the fourth 16th note is on 720. And then the whole pattern repeats again. All right. So this is so what I would say that the numbers you should memorize are 3 zeros, 240, 480, and 720. Those are the 16th notes. And just know the 480 is an eighth note between each beat. The other numbers that are very helpful are 0, 320, and 640. Can anybody venture a guess what those would be? So 960. I know this is math, and I'm sorry. This has to be.
Would that be a triplet?
That would be eighth note triplets. Very good. 320 and 640. So the first eighth note triplet starts in the same spot as all of these, right? So that's 0. And if you divide 960 by 3, you get 320. So if I had an eighth note triplet, it would be somewhere over here between these two, and that would be between these two. So if this is 240 and 480, it'd be 320. And then the third triplet would be somewhere over here, and that would be 640. So I will show you that in the Pro Tools counter. So, you know, I tried to explain this for years, and then a few years ago, I wrote this. I drew this up, and I think this is the best way to explain it. So let me just open up a new Pro Tools session. I'm just going to call this test for now, and I'll save it on my desktop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in here. Then I'm going to set my grid to eighth notes and go to grid mode. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the big counter up. So this will be easier for everybody to see. If we look here on our timeline, I've got the grid set to eighth notes. Right here, you can see that. So you'll see on the time ruler here for bars and beats, we only get bar 1, beat 1, and then bar 1, beat 1, the second eighth note is 480, right? So if I wanted to be there, if I had this, you see that the playback head goes right to 480. Now, if I type in 240 here, you see that it's exactly halfway between beat 1 and the second eighth note of beat 1. The playback head is exactly in between that. You don't see an indicator here because I've got the grid set to eighth notes. But if I change the grid to 16th notes, you'll see that it says these two match. Okay, so let's say I do this. Okay, so what measure are we on?
The eighth measure.
Correct. And what beat?
Beat 2.
And what subdivision of the beat is this?
The third 16th note.
Is it? The first 16th note starts on 0. See this, don't worry about this. This confuses 99.999% of all students at first. The first 16th note, the first eighth note, and the note, the beat starts on 3 zeros. So then,
the fourth 16th note.
Say that one more time.
The fourth 16th note.
Exactly. Great. Okay. So 720 is the fourth 16th note of a beat, a beat. So then if I did, right? So now we're dealing with triplets. Which triplet is this in a beat?
The second triplet.
Correct. And then what would be the third triplet?
640.
Correct. All right. Anybody confused on this? I can certainly go over this again. What I think I'll do is we'll move forward and I'll keep on talking about it as I'm teaching, right? So that'll be part of the lesson instead of me just removing it from the lesson for now. You don't set the PPQ. That's set for 960 in Pro Tools. I can't see who that is. Who's speaking there, so I know who's. Daniel. Daniel. Okay. Yeah. I'll recognize I'll learn your voice after a few classes. Yeah. In Pro Tools, you can't set the PPQ. It's set to 960. I don't have a problem with that, personally speaking. That's pretty good. In Logic and Cubase and probably Reaper and also in Performer, you can, I believe, Digital Performer, you can adjust the PPQ. 192 used to sound pretty stiff at times. That Studio Vision. That was the only thing, one of the few things I didn't like about that sequencer. Okay, great. So let's, You should have something now that looks a little bit like this, depending upon which piece you chose for the homework. With all the dissonant notes. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we are going to use these tracks and we're going to create an arrangement of this piece by not playing anymore. We've played everything in. Let me take that back. As you're working, you're creating an arrangement. If you want to add additional music to this, like some counter lines, I don't have an issue with that, right? This isn't about recreating Bartok perfectly or whatever piece you're using. This is about learning the techniques to create music. So to do this, you need to think about what kind of an ensemble you want to write for, right? So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 instruments here. Now, what I want to do to not hear sound anymore. Well, before we start arranging things, let's go into one other area of editing. Let me get this up so I can zoom in. Now, in the Midi Editor, right here, you see a little sideways facing triangle. So you're going to click on that, and it might already be open, and that will open up another little area of the Midi Editor, and these are called lanes. And if you hover here, you can click and make that bigger. And you'll notice sometimes there are more than one lane. So I've got one that says velocity and one that says pitch bend. We only want to work with velocity. So I'm going to just click on that little minus, and that will get rid of that. And then I can make this bigger by clicking there and dragging down. And what velocity is the speed at which you press down a note on your MIDI keyboard. It's not how hard you hit it, it's how fast the note goes down. So, you know, I could play soft and go down very quickly, or I could play soft and go down very softly, so that the amount of time it takes for the key to go from the top to the bottom, that's your velocity. And the MIDI spec has that there's 127 or 128, depending upon who you talk to. The resolution of your velocity is 128. So, you know, you can get any value from 128. There's going to be a new MIDI spec coming out at some point in the future, and that will increase it more. But for right now, it's pretty good, 128 levels. It's been in use since 1984, so it's useful. Now, when you're playing, after you've played something in, right, you may not have something that, you may have some notes that stick out. So what you can do is, if I zoom in on this, you can use the grabber tool, and you can hold on this, and you see the note becomes illuminated. And when you look right in this area here, you'll see that a number comes up when you click on the velocity stalk and start. Oh, really? Oh, I'm sorry. It used to be up here, and on the new version, it's now down here. Okay, so if you look right here, you'll see a number, and that's the velocity value. So, right, you can't see that. Let me zoom in on that. It'll say 89, 90, 93, you know, it goes up and down. The higher the number, the louder the sound will be, but velocity can do other things as well. So let's say I'm right here. So what I want you to do is make all these velocities even to start out with, right? So a quick way to do that is to hover in here, do Command A. Let me get my keycaster up. So you put you just hover in this area, Command A, and everything becomes highlighted. You're going to drag one of these stalks and bring it all the way up to the top. And you may have to do it a few times to get everything even, and then bring everything down to maybe halfway so that it's all mezzo forte when you're playing it. This is, right? So now you've got everything even. And I'm going to mute violin 2. And then what you want to do is, you could do one of two things. You could either leave this like this for now and start arranging and then change the velocities as you work, or you can rough out velocities to create phrasing and dynamics here and then fine tune them later once you put this material onto another track. So on this first bit here, and I'm getting a little bit of, I want to phrase this. So the first thing I'm noticing is that these notes are the same volume as these notes. I want these to be softer. So I'm going to lasso both of these. So I'm clicking and I'm clicking and dragging to the right. So let me show you that, what I'm doing with the mouse. I'm clicking and dragging to the right on the. You can do the same thing with the trackpad. Click and drag to the right. Right. So you click and drag, and everything becomes highlighted. So let me show you that here. So I'm doing this now with the track, and then you just click in their field, and everything will become unhighlighted. So click and drag with one finger on the trackpad, or using the mouse, which I find much better for this. Click and drag. And then what you could do is you'll see down here that just these two stalks are illuminated. And if you click on them, now that'll be softer, and you could see it did not affect the top note. So now you can hear the melodic content a little bit better. All right. So what I might want to do is something, I'm going to do a phrase. I'm going to do ba, 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 right? I'm in the wrong key, but so what I would do is, so I have my first note softer. I'll leave my second note the same. I'm going to make this note a little bit louder. And then this note louder, and then do a little bit of a decrescendo. Let's listen to that. That's nice. It's subtle, but it's nice. I will exaggerate it into something that's not musical, just so you can really hear it. Right, and then to undo all that, you can just do Command Z to get back to what you had originally. So you have to develop an ear and taste. And what you're doing with this, right, is two things. When you work in notation software, you're writing a roadmap that other musicians have to play to create the story or the trip, right? Or where you're, the journey that you're taking. With these sequences and doing this, you're creating the roadmap, you're creating the journey. And as you're doing that, you have to start thinking of these things as if you're mixing them, right? Or as if you're a performer of the particular instrument that you're going to be writing for. So right here, I'm just roughing out a nice shape, and I'm going to fine tune that once I assign it to a regular instrument. All right, so this first one is pretty nice, and let's do the second one. Again, I'm going to click and drag to the right and lasso all of these, and just bring these down for now. I may do something with the dynamics on these as well once I get them onto another instrument. But with this one here, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make this soft. And this is the second phrase, so I might make this whole phrase a little bit louder. Is that a little louder? It's a little too loud. Okay, great. So I've got that. Now let me listen to the second violin part against that. So what's wrong with that?
Violin 2 is overpowering.
Correct.
Violin 1.
Correct. So I'm gonna I want to select violin 2 by clicking on this dot here and then clicking here to get violin 1 out of there. All right. So what I'm going to do now, there may be spots where I want this to be louder than violin 1, right? But let me just, I think we're working just with the first 4 bars, right? Okay, so I'm going to go to the downbeat of measure 5. So another way that you can select all these notes is you can just see how it's across. Once you go into this area where there's the time, not the bars per and beats, but right here, and click, you'll see that everything is being selected below, right? So that's yet another way to select everything there. So you could, and right, so that's everything is selected, or you could just, I would like to start way up here and just click and drag across like that. So those are the two ways that you could select those notes. Just clicking and dragging along the ruler, the minutes and seconds part of the ruler, or just clicking and dragging like that. Either way is fine. I don't have a preference. Whatever works for you. I go back and forth. Option and drag. Let's see. I'm not sure about that, Daniel, because look what happens. If I option and drag, I'm going to have to... it's the same. It's the,
Windows is like Alt, which on the Mac it should be Option.
yeah, it does. I think it might be different on Windows because I can just click and drag like this. That's pretty easy without touching the keyboard with my left hand.
I see.
Now, one thing you can do, though, let me just show you another thing, too. So if I'm working on this note here and I want to work on the next one, I could go just like that. But if I push the right arrow on your keyboard, your numeric, right? You can navigate like that. So that's another way to navigate around if you don't want to use the mouse. So let's go back to here and I'm going to click on these and I'm just going to drag them all down. Okay, I need to get all these down as well. So now I'm going to create some phrasing, right? So I'm going to do a crescendo. I might make the first note a little bit louder, and then it'll get softer for the second note. And I want to make this bigger. I don't have enough room there. And here too. Okay, and so now I'm just going to crescendo up. Now, I'm going to show you automated ways to do all these things or quicker ways to do all these things in the future. But for right now, I want you to learn how to do this manual stuff because you're just getting the foundation. And then right here, violin 1 stops playing. So you could have this little melodic figure here take over the interest. Right, or da-dee-doo-da, something like that. And then maybe what you might want to do is go back to violin 1, select all this, and as this, it's the second time iteration of that phrase, make everything just a little bit louder, right? And it'll keep all of the same parameters, and then go back here, right? And then, and I think that very first note on the right here could be a little. So see how as I'm working, I'm adjusting things and I'm balancing things out to make it sound more musical, right? Yeah. And the same with this. We're going ascending. Okay, so that's pretty good. I'm going to leave that for now, right? And what I would say to do is go through the whole piece and get something that sounds nice and musical. And also, if you find, I find this tempo, which is 80, I find it to be really pedantic and slow. So when I did my arrangement of this, I sped it up. you can do that if you want. I don't have a problem with that. Okay. So let's say I wanted to make this at 104, let's say. It's a little bit less pedantic and plodding to me. So if you want to speed it up, you be my guest. That's your call. If you like it at 80, that's fine too. Okay, so you'll notice that I've got a bunch of other instruments here, right? And so what you're going to do is I'm going to have 3 levels of assignment depending upon where you are, and I'll tell you what they are, in a couple of minutes. But let me just show you what to do. So in other words, like graduate students and people that want undergraduates that want the challenge, I'm going to give you a certain number of instruments to arrange for, and undergraduates who took recording studio fundamentals last semester and want a challenge, might be but not as much as the graduate students, might be lesser instruments, and the other students less. So there'll be 3 different levels of tracks. I guess that's the best way to put it. All right, so we've instantiated, I put in 7 more instrument tracks. So Command Shift N, and I just went 7 stereo instrument tracks, right? Instrument tracks right here. Sorry, excuse me. All right, so I created those, right? And those are my instruments. So I'm going to delete these in a minute. But what you're going to do is you're going to go into the insert area. Oh, and also to get these to not be selected, you hold down the Option key and just click on one. I'm going to go here and I'm going to go to Air Music Technology or Instrument, and we're going to use something called Xpand 2. This is going to be the main thing that we use to create sounds for this assignment. I'm going to give you some links over the next couple of weeks if you want to expand your palette with some very nice free software instruments that you can download from some of the big sample library companies. But for this assignment, let's just use this. This is a thing that when it came out in like 2008 was very good. And it's still very useful now, but it's 14 years later, and Avid should update this to something a little bit more feature rich. But this works very well, and I can certainly get something that sounds really good using sounds from this. So this is the GUI. And you'll notice that there are 4 slots that you can put sounds into. And this is called a rompler, ROMPLER, which means that there are samples in ROM memory, read-only memory. And this instrument creates sound by accessing those samples and playing them back. And I'm going to get into samples later on in the semester when we start talking about audio. So to get a sound in here, there's several ways of doing it. What I want you to do is to go up here to the preset menu. And when you click here, we're going to get a sub menu with even more sub menus, right? And this is huge. So there's a lot of sounds in here. So let's say I wanted a flute sound, and you don't have to use orchestral instruments. You could use synthesizers. You could use whatever sounds you want. So brass and woodwinds. So we've got, just scroll down here and this says flute. So I click on this and you'll notice that it says flute right here in the first sound, in the first slot. Now we're going to go over these controls and how to do stuff here and over here and stuff down here. We're going to go over that. I'm going to teach you how to program original sounds in this software. All right. But for right now, keeping it simple, one step at a time. So I a flute in there, and then we would name our track here, flute. Oh, I'm going to have to name this flute too because I already have a flute. And then record enable. And you see that it's dynamic. There's dynamic sensitivity. So if I play the keyboard soft, right, push the, so it doesn't have a, it does go from soft to very loud, but there's not a ton of space in between. I'm going to show you how to, later on in the semester, I'm going to show you how to expand the dynamic capabilities of the sounds in this instrument. But for right now, we're just going to get through this. Okay, so what I want you to do is figure out an ensemble. I'm just going to delete these for now. And so what I've done is I've got 2 winds, a horn, a harp, and I'm using ensemble strings. So I've got 1 strings that I'm going to use for high-pitched sounds, and they're sustained, and 1 for lower-pitched sounds, and then I've got pizzicato. That's my ensemble. And notice I've got this set up in a way that's logical, like an orchestra. So if you look at an orchestra score, the woodwinds are on top. They go by pitch, so flute, then oboe. Then there's brass. So I've got horn, as a French horn is a brass. Then there's percussion, and harp is considered part of the percussion family. And then the strings below that. If you're going to use other instruments, figure out something that's logical, that sort of makes sense in terms of instruments together. So in other words, if you've got an acoustic guitar and electric guitar, don't have the acoustic guitar up at the top of your session and the electric guitar down at the bottom. They should be together because they're guitars, you know? Okay. Now, what else I did here is you notice that it's pretty. It's color coordinated, right? So how did I do that? Well, and also some of you notice that your Pro Tools is all dark. It looks different than mine, right? You can customize that as well. You guys are looking at the newer version. This is the one that I'm used to because this is the way, this is the color scheme that I've just been grown accustomed to. The darker scene, I'll show you how you can play around with that. But for right now, to change the color on this, you go to this left-hand border, and this is the color code. And if you double click on this, a palette comes up. And just make sure that it says tracks in this box here, right? And then you can click a color and it changes. Right? And what you can also do is if you click on a track header, hold the shift key down and click on another track header, right? You see that there are 2 boxes here. You could change the color for both of those just like that. So that's how you get colors up. Now there's ways to customize that, right? I will show you this in the future. Let's just do one thing at a time. Okay. So I've got flute. Why is there no flute there? Oboe. Horn. Harp. Strings high, low, now, and then pits. Now, the strings high and the strings low are the same patch, right? I'm just going to, because what they have, these are ensemble patches, so you can play very low and very high. Okay. So the way I'm going to want you to do this is by copying and pasting. All right. So we learned how to do note duration. We learned how to do velocity. And now we're learning how to copy and paste. And so there's one of two. So what you could do is click and drag and see how violin 1 is highlighted there. You could go Command C to copy that. And then put your playback head down in the flute, because I'm going to put that in a flute, and then hit the return key so it's back at measure 1. And if you paste, which is Command V, that gets in there. But you'll notice that the clip here says violin. It doesn't say flute, right? So in order to fix that, you want to merge paste, and that's Option M like Mary. Option M, and you notice the track header says flute now instead of violin. So if I just paste it, it says violin up here, but I want that to be flute. So it's merge paste, Option M. Now, whoops. Also, my clips in my tracks should be the same color as the track. So I have a problem here. So I have to go back to my setup, go to my preferences, and set this up properly. Really? Oh, track color. There we go. So we went over that in the first class, but what happens with this is somehow this particular session, which I did in 2019, it opened up with the wrong preferences set up. So you do need to know how to fix all that stuff. All right, so let me play this. Oh, and you don't want to hear these anymore, right? So there's several ways that you could not hear these. You could click right here and mute them. Right there, and then they don't play back. You could also take out the piano inserts. You could double click on these and do the key Command M like Mary, and that mutes them. And to unmute them, it's Command M again. Whoops. So to mute that, it's Command M, and you see they become gray. Command M to unmute them. But I'm just going to click for right now this mute button here. So I've got this in here. Right? And so that's weird. So you heard a weird jump. That's because there's 2 notes in there. So I want to get rid of those. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to I'm going to highlight these, and I'm going to copy these, and I'm going to delete these. Now I'm in here. I could just go to the oboe and use my selector tool, and just here I could just paste it in. And so now I've got that in there just like that. So let me now, hearing that, whoops, excuse me. I want to make this a little bit softer, because this one a little bit louder, right? Because the oboe has a very nasally sound. It's got a lot of overtones, so it'll cut through everything. Let me highlight these both and bring them both down. I like the contour, but great. And then I'm going to do the same here. Copy that, and let's put that in the harp. Now, this is where you have to start using your arranger's hat, right? So I like the beginning of that. It's delicate. It's really nice. But what I would like to do is take this part here and maybe double that in the horn, right? So there's a couple of ways of doing that. Well, what you can do is change the resolution here to 1/8 notes and just copy that and then merge paste that. right? And so now you're getting a little bit of an orchestration. And then maybe I might want to... Right, so I might want to play something in on the keyboard here on that first bit. I might. I'm going to try it. Let me just see what the pitches are. It sounded like a D. Maybe later, but you get the idea. You know, I'm starting to think about this as an arrangement and how I can, you know, build this up. And so then now we're in the second bit here. And right here, this might be kind of nice to take all of this and merge paste it onto the horn. Okay, so did you hear that one of those notes on the horn really stuck out? And this is from bad programming. See how this note stuck out even though the velocity is softer? So then that's just what I'm saying, you have to fine tune. And then you could make this whole bit a little bit louder, right? So it's because it's melodic content, it's in between phrases. And okay, so now what if I copy this and merge paste it? Let's see, let me think about this for a second. Merge pasted it there and then opened it up here and copied that, deleted it, and then put that in the strings. And then this little phrase here, right? I could copy and put that in with the oboe. Merge paste that right there. Right, so you see how quickly this can be done, right? And so I want you to go through the whole piece, right? And orchestrate it just like this. Now at this point, I'd have to go over to here and work on the velocity there, and the same thing here. So maybe I should just continue on with this, and you guys watch. Is that okay? All right. So let's go back, and we've got the piano here. So I should, you should do this before you start orchestrating. But let me just pick it up from here. Okay. So. And let me make this softer. So here's the spot where if you were in here and Daniel, so if I went like this, I held down the Option key on a Mac, and then those. Oh, hold on.
I was thinking when you have the selector tool.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, if you have the selector tool. Then
Okay, so but another thing here is if you click and drag, right? I've let go of the mouse now, right? No mouse. Hold down the Shift key, and then you see I can select more and let go of the mouse. So in other words, instead of trying to be really accurate like this, and you see how I've selected notes that I don't want, I can just do this. These guys here, I can let go of the mouse, or I can hold on to the mouse, hit the Shift key. No, you have to let go of the mouse and hit the Shift key, and then you can select those and bring that down. So now I'm going to I'm going to select these like that and bring them all up and then fine tune them a little bit more. All right, let's listen to this. Oops. Oh, you don't want to play the piano back, right? The piano is not going to be in your arrangement. All right, let's add our violin too. Interesting, right? So let's just lasso all of those and bring them down. Excuse me 1 second. You know, I succumbed to COVID. I got it at the dentist's office in June, and I still have a cough. It's really a drag. Anyway, at the dentist's office. Okay, so you know what might be nice is right here. Right here, I might want to. Yeah, so I'm going to shape this. And you could just, you know, what you could do is also just hit the right arrow, right, with one hand and just have the mouse ready. Whoops. So the effect I got here was sort of like overlapping, right? The top part is fading down and this part is getting louder. So just adding stuff that, thank you, Daniel, for that multi-channel plugin thingamabob. Now, let me show you another way to select notes. So if I'm here and I want the note above, excuse me. See, if I push that arrow to the right, it goes to the top, it goes up. So in other words, all I did was I went from this note, I pushed the right arrow and it goes to the next note in the chord, right? So I'm at the original one. I'm going to push the right arrow. I'll push the right arrow again, and I'll push the right arrow again. You see it goes down to that note, right arrow again, back up. And then if I want to go back, I push the left arrow. So that's a cool way of navigating. And there's more things you can do with the arrows to make your workflow faster, which we will get into. Okay, so where am I? So these all get softer. And I'm going to do a crescendo with this again. And go back to violin 1. Right, so I held the shift key down to get that last note. So click and drag, let go, hold the shift key, click and drag. Now there's multiple ways to do this, and I'm going to show you this as the semester goes on, right? But this is teaching you the basic foundation skills that you will use later in a much larger sense, where you're not doing every note like this, where you're just zipping through this much faster. But this is like, you know, it's like you're learning how to play scales before you can blow on a jazz tune. So let me go back here, and this first note is too loud. Okay, right. Okay, so we've gotten up to that point, so let's continue on with our orchestration. So I'm going to take this whole section here. I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to merge paste that, which is Option M, into the strings, high. All right, that's okay. And I'm going to now go here and select these guys here, copy those, and then delete those. And I'm going to go to my horn. And I'm going to paste that into there. Let me just see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to have to get this note back here. That's fine. Oops. Now, there's something here that I want to show you that's very important for realism. I'm just going to play the French horn. So a French horn player would not play it like that. A French horn player, they have to take breaths, right? So you have to simulate that by leaving space between notes. And this, it's so funny because when I take film scoring and when I teach film scoring and students only do stuff with notation, it sounds so stiff because there's never any breaths between notes. So I try to get people to write with notation. Instead of writing a whole note, write a dotted, a double dotted half note so that there's like an eighth note rest at the end of something with the wind instrument, right? So just stuff like that. So what you're going to do here is you're going to go right over to your edit mode over here, and you're going to select the other one that we're going to use, which is slip. So up to now, we've been using grid, and now we're going to use slip. So those are the two that we're going to work with for the time being. And we will learn the other two, certainly use shuffle when we do audio and spot when we do audio. And what you could do now is if you use your trim tool, which is this guy over here, you can do breaths by just hovering over and shortening some of these notes. Like that, just a tiny bit. And maybe you'll leave those two like that because they're not the same repeated pitch. Right? And then you could go back through here. There's no other repeated pitches, I don't think, in the French horn. But let's listen to that now. It'll sound a lot better. Right? Now, obviously, these low notes need to have the velocity brought down to make it sound better. But phrasing is so important. I missed a note here, sorry. I'll show you how to do that next week, that last bit. Oh, we don't want to hear the piano either. So we've got What I might do is take these notes here and in the French horn, copy them and merge paste them onto the flute. That might be too low. That might be considered alto flute, right? Let's listen to that. That's fine. That's the B below high C, so that works fine. With a regular flute, you don't want to be down too low you just don't want to play the instrument down there unless it's exposed and you want an effect. Otherwise, it won't be heard in an ensemble. Each register of an instrument has a certain character to it, and with a flute, it's from high C all the way up above the staff. It gets very brilliant and it's beautiful. It's really great range for that. The lower pitches can be used. I'm not saying they can't be used. I'm just saying you have to just a little bit more careful with that. And you might consider using an alto flute if something's in towards the lower range of a C flute. Okay, so. And then right here, I'm going to copy these and I'm going to put those on the oboe. So now we've done, see, I'm orchestrating, right? Okay, so now the oboe's too loud, right? So I'm mixing as I'm working. Great. So let's listen to that with the strings. And now we need to get our low notes in there. So we're going to go here and we're going to copy this first bit. And I'm going to put it in here with the harp. So I'm going to merge paste it there. That's fine. Let me think about this for a second. Okay, so I'm going to put that here with the pizzicato strings. Now, I'm going to experiment around. Let me show you something else. So these are all, you can highlight all these, right? And that sounds better. So what did I do? I transposed everything down an octave. So the way I did that was I held the shift key down and hit the downward arrow. Shift and downward arrow. And upward arrow transposes everything up an octave. So shift and downward arrow. And then right here we can switch from pizzicato to our low strings. And then this here, I'm going to copy this. And so that's too low. That's too low. You don't really hear it with the flute. So I'm going to do the opposite thing with the flute. I'm going to hold down the shift key and hit the upward arrow and bring that up an octave. Right? So let's listen to what we've got so far. And always save, right? Command S. Always save, save, save after, like constantly, Yeah. Okay, so, right. So, I mean, if I worked without talking, I could be done and have this orchestrated in like another 10 or 15 minutes. But do you guys have any questions on what I want you to do with this?
Do you want us to use that exact orchestration
No,
for the advanced? Okay.
I want you to know. So here's the deal. So graduate students are going to do 8 instruments. Anybody who's an undergraduate and wants a challenge can do the same. Otherwise, you can do 6 instruments. And the basic undergraduate students who are not music majors, if you want to do 4 instruments. So 8, 6, and 4. Okay. And if you could do as many, if you're an undergraduate student, if you're a music major, do at least 6. You can do 8 if you want. If you're not a music major and just a MAP student, do 4. And if you want to do more, you can. I'm just making the minimum requirements for the grade. And because we're going to do more work with this next week. All right. So there's going to be two more. This assignment will be 2 more weeks because we're going to add more things to this to make it sound better. I'm going to teach you more stuff next week with this. So color coding, organizing your instruments logically. If you're a music major and you're going to pick traditional orchestral instruments like you're looking at a score, if you're using other kinds of instruments, try to group them together in a way that makes sense. Remember, I gave the example, if you're going to use a sampled guitar and an acoustic guitar, have them next to each other, stuff like that. Color code the instruments so that it looks nice. And notice I've got the winds the same color, the horn is a color, the harp is a color, and the strings are the same color. And so, a way to work on this would be, as I've said before, spend half an hour 4 times over the next week and try to get it done instead of waiting until next Wednesday night to try to do the whole thing in 5 hours. You're not going to learn anything. So the first half hour, you're going to go through and maybe you'll do the dynamics for violin 1. The second half hour, you'll do violin 2. Then you'll spend a half an hour and you'll orchestrate the first half because it's copying and pasting. And the second half hour, the fourth half hour, you'll do the rest. And maybe you'll find 20 minutes additional to just fine tune and go over it and tweak it, right? So just, try to schedule in time as if you're practicing an instrument to do this. That's the best way to learn this stuff, is repetition. So you choose your own ensemble. That becomes that time consuming as well, right? Because you don't know the software, you don't know what Xpand 2. There's literally 1,000 instruments in there. Here, let me do this. Command Shift N. There are pads in there that you can play that are really nice. Okay, Andrew, no problem. So, these still sound pretty good. I would use something like that in a track. I'd tweak it a little bit. So there are pads. There are bright pads, like, let's say, if you wanted to do a completely, excuse me. You could do that as well if you'd like, right? So don't limit yourself to just orchestral instruments. That's all up to you. And then then they've got polysynths. They do have pianos in here. They have vocals. These are just I don't think they have solo vocals. They're mostly choirs. Male choirs. All kinds of strings. I do believe they have. Let me just see something here. Right, so they do have a solo violin, which is okay. You have to tweak it a little bit. But it's mostly ensemble strings. They also have synth basses, regular basses, drums, percussion, loops, multi-timbral stuff. And then I'm going to teach you guys how to make your own presets. I mean, you could really do some beautiful stuff with not that much work. Yeah. All right, so I want to, so you know, you can play around with that and find sounds, but to do the best you can. We're going to try to get through this project in the next 2 weeks completely, but just do the best you can. We'll see where everybody is next week, and then save, right? And then another thing too. This came up, I believe, with Andrew. Let me just. One of the Andrews.
Yes, mate.
So if I do this and then quit Pro Tools, the next time Pro Tools opens up, you're going to see a blank screen because Pro Tools remembers the screen set that you quit and save from, right? And now to get that window back up, you can go into the window menu here and do your edit, right, like this. But the key command is the command button and the equals, and that will also hide it. Well, that'll bring up the mix page, right? So if you close that window, you want to bring it back. It's command and the equals sign. Now. So what you want to do is before you put this away, you're going to do Command S, you're going to save, and then you can either Command Q and quit Pro Tools, right? Or you could do Command Shift and W, which will close that session, but not quit Pro Tools. So now I'm going to open that up again. And see how it opens up perfectly well. But if I do this, right, I'm going to open this up. And, right, you don't see anything. That's because you saved it with the edit window, the edit page closed. Now, I want to show you another key command here. And I want to show you how I'd like the sessions saved. So I want to fit everything on the timeline into that window. Control Option A. And when you close out of Pro Tools, what I want to see is everything, and also I want to see all your tracks. So Control Option and the down arrow makes everything smaller, and the up arrow makes everything bigger. right? So you see there's a spot, there's some blank space down here. That's fine. Don't worry about that. This way I can open up the session and I can get a nice, anybody, me, a person that you're working with, collaborating with, they can open up your session and they can see everything you've done. Right? And then lastly, do you see how this instrument is highlighted? None of these should be highlighted. So you hold down the Option key and click, and then that gets unhighlighted. And so this is what you would save, and then either quit Pro Tools or Command-Shift-W. And then when I open it up, it will remember where you saved it. See that? I see. So a couple of you are in practice rooms. Is that correct?
Yeah.
We'll be in person before you know it. Okay. So let me close out of this.